Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. It's Friday morning, the 27th of March. I'm sorry I didn't get this posted yesterday. It was kind of a crazy day. Had a lot of online conferencing stuff that really ate up the day, and I apologize. I've posted to Blackboard, and by when I finish recording this video, I will have sent you a link to Google Slides on Ben Franklin. My relationship to PowerPoint is not good, and I thought it would be easier for you just to follow along on slides if that's your preference. That's your call, or you can just listen to this and look at the slides later, whatever works best for you. Before I get to Franklin for today, though, I just want to tell you that next Thursday, so a week from yesterday, next Thursday, April 2nd, I'm going to have a required synchronous session. So during our regular class time, 9:30 on Thursday, I'll set it up in Zoom. Blackboard collaborates. Zoom is easy. You don't need to pay anything. You just click on it. And I know some of you are using Zoom in your other classes. I need to talk with you about the research paper, and I want to get a sense of how you all are doing with this class, but also every other class. How you're feeling about the assignments that are coming up between now and May. And the easiest and the best way for us to have that conversation is if we do it together on Zoom in a synchronous session. So I'll be in touch with you by email with details about that, but please get that in your calendars and know that it's coming up. So Franklin, read the biographical material in the Norton, please. It's important that you do that. His life is big and complicated and fun and interesting. If you think you know him, you don't. He's a really, really fascinating human. Page 439 of the Norton. It's a nice little biographical write-up. I'm not going to talk about his biography today. There's just too much, except for a few very minor things. You've got a lot of reading in Franklin. I think some of you have encountered him already in 234 in the American Lit Survey, some of you even in high school, which always shocks me. But yay, Massachusetts Public Schools. But you have more reading today than we've had really since Equiano, and I really need you to hunker down with that. So all I'm going to do in the video today is just sort of highlight stuff from the slides and point you to particular topics and themes in the text, since it is a big, juicy text. I've also, as you'll see in the slides, given you specific page numbers to accompany each of the topics that I've highlighted. I'm trying to make this easy for you, so you can, when you read the text, you'll have sort of a guide to places where I really want you to pay particular attention. So Franklin's dates, 1706 to 1790. If you think about that, that's almost the entire 18th century, and the 18th century is enormously important in terms of change and progress, depending on how you understand progress, in what becomes the United States during Franklin's lifetime. He really spans the shift away from Puritanism to the Enlightenment. 1706. I mean, there's a story of him being in Cotton Mather's house. So he's got roots and sort of beginnings in that Puritan culture and Puritan life. He's born in Boston. We think that one of his first teachers when he was a little kid might have been Madam Knight. You remember Sarah Kemble Knight? Knight ran what was called a dame school, which is sort of like preschool, elementary school for neighborhood kids, just sort of teaching them to read, sometimes for boys in particular to write. We think Franklin went to school with her. But just, and then he becomes sort of along with Jefferson, I think, one of the representative figures of the American Enlightenment. So he really moves us through that enormous change in American culture in his lifetime. So as I said, he's born in Boston, but moves as a young man to Philadelphia. He's very closely associated with Philadelphia. It's the third largest city in the British Empire in the 18th century. It's a center for the arts and a capital for printing, which is, of course, Franklin's business. He's very much at the center of cultural life in Philadelphia. One of the founders of the University of Pennsylvania. He's the first president of the University of Pennsylvania, really active in scientific and cultural life in that city. His reputation During the 18th century, he's a rock star. He's really well known. He's the first sort of American celebrity in many ways. His image, his face is printed on, coins, and he's just all over the place. He would walk down the street in Paris and people would know who he was. His reputation at home, equally powerful in his lifetime. As a writer, other American writers and British writers too don't think much of Franklin, primarily because they see him as too tidy, too controlled, too kind of ruthless and ambitious, I think, a human to be beloved as a writer or as a persona, a literary persona. D.H. Lawrence, who's an English novelist, linked Franklin, saw him as kind of an embodiment of the American Boy Scout, sort of capable, conscientious, tidy, good guy to have in an emergency, but not particularly complicated or interesting. And I think that those assessments of Franklin really miss who not only he actually was, but even who he presents himself to us as in the autobiography, which is a richer and more complicated figure than one might immediately think. That said, the persona in the autobiography, something I really want you to pay attention to, he does sort of present himself as someone who kind of opportunities just land in his lap again and again and again. He works hard, yes, and he's always got his eye on the main chance, but his ambition is almost passive. So pay attention to that when you're reading the text. The autobiography, one of the many reasons it's interesting to us is that in it, Franklin creates himself. He fashions this persona. It's as much that you believe what he presents to be real. That's as significant in the text as that it is real, right? He's part of that American idea of self-creation. You can be whoever you want to be as long as, people buy it. Think about how, in America, our ancestors come from other places and become something new, become whatever it is they want to be. And that's what Franklin really represents. And many scholars see the autobiography as an act of self-creation. In writing the autobiography, he creates himself. Now, the person that he presents himself to us as in the autobiography is, of course, not entirely accurate. He was much kind of sketchier in real life than he seems to be in the autobiography. He had at least one child outside of marriage, his son William, to whom the first part of the autobiography is addressed. He ultimately has a falling out with that son, but when he begins writing the autobiography, he's quite close to him. His wife, Deborah Reed, raises that William as her own child. When he lived in Paris, when he was our representative envoy in Paris, he liked to entertain guests while taking air baths, which meant he would sort of be sitting naked in his apartment. People would come to see him. He wrote some really wild, I have not read it, got to get to that, erotic literature that obviously was not published in his lifetime, but that was circulated. People knew about it. He liked good wine. He liked good food. So his representation of himself as the water drinker, the sort of straight-laced, hardworking American, is not exactly fictitious, but it's exaggerated. So he's a more complicated person than the autobiography wants you to believe. So about the text itself, on page 466 to 514, so we're reading parts 1 and 2 only. Franklin wrote the autobiography in 4 sittings. He just kind of blasted it out 4 different times in his life between 1771 and 1790, the year he dies. It's not published until 1868. Again, we're only reading part 1 and part 2. Part 1 is addressed to his son, William. It's largely sort of family history, describing his rise in the world, how he becomes successful as a businessman. And then part 2 is mostly, almost exclusively, the scheme for moral perfection, where he sort of tells you how he endeavors to become a perfect person. And again, that's really all that we're only reading parts 1 and part 2. But it does go on, parts 3 and 4. If you're interested, knock yourself out, continue to read in the text. So I just want to highlight what I think are the central topics and themes. If you go to Google Slides, I've given you page numbers in the text where those illustrations of those themes can be found. I think really we're interested in this text primarily for what he has to say about religion, what he has to say about writing and reading, what he values in writing, what kinds of writing he values, same for reading, and what he recommends people read, how reading and writing have been useful tools for him in his life. He has a very interesting relationship to reading and writing. Also want you to pay attention to how he represents the Enlightenment, how he responds to the Enlightenment, how he both embodies it and critiques it. Very interesting, very important. I want you to pay attention to his relationships to other people, his friendships, also sort of related to that, what role he sees as important for a virtuous man to play in the community. I also want you to look at the humor in the text. It's funnier than 21st century readers sometimes realize. He pokes fun at himself. That's sort of a minor point, but it's worth seeing. There are these little moments where an actual human being pokes through. I also want you to look at this text as an articulation of a particular kind of American mythology about the value of hard work, it's a kind of immigrant story, though. He's born in this country. He sees himself as an immigrant moving from Boston to Philadelphia. He really has this kind of myth-making enterprise about what it means to be an American. I want you to pay attention to his relationship to authority. He has some troubles with authority, particularly early in the text. And last but certainly not least, how is Franklin defining virtue? This is something we're going to be talking about from here to the end of the semester. So in summary, really Franklin, as I said in the beginning, uses this text, the autobiography, to create himself. It's a self-fashioning text. And it's also really interesting to us in that it gives us insight into Enlightenment era ideas about religion, about virtue, about American identity, social mobility, at least as those things are understood among fairly well-educated and well-educated white landowning men. So enjoy the text, go post on Blackboard, email me with any questions, and keep well. And I look forward to seeing you all next Thursday in the synchronous Zoom session that I will post a link to shortly. Take care, guys. Bye.